This year's election is going to be a little different.
Instead of one election day, we now have a voting season.
That special time of year when polls can open weeks before Election Day.
When your mailbox can become a voting booth.
When how you vote is just as important as who you vote for.
And how, when, and where to cast your ballot depends on your state.
'Tis the season to be prepared.
This year, plan your vote.
Welcome to The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Wednesday, October the 21st, 2020. On this edition of The Politicrat, stimulating the stimulus. It looks like a no-go, and Mitch McConnell is the biggest reason why. Plus, the pandemic and over 222,000 people in the United States are dead, and millions around the world. Plus, voting. And now over 40 million people have cast their vote early. Have you joined them yet? That and one or two things extra on this edition of The Politicrat. Next. Welcome back. So, I talked about the stimulus yesterday and how the Republicans are really the ones, along with Donald Trump, who have no real interest in advancing a bill. I mean, they don't. And I know there was some votes today on the Senate floor. But look, with this $500 billion package that McConnell's put up, but this is just nonsense. It's all political posturing. I said this yesterday and the day before that the Republicans are politicking all over the place here with this stimulus package. The truth is, as I've said, is that Mitch McConnell does not want a stimulus deal. And he knows that when he puts up a $500 billion bill, which is a pittance, he knows darn well that it's not going to pass. And he knows damn well the House is going to reject it out of hand. So it's a stunt by McConnell, who is in his own Senate race, of course, against the Democratic challenger, Amy McGrath, the lieutenant colonel, who is a fighter pilot and has done tours of duty in Afghanistan and everywhere else, I believe, and a lot of other places, who beat the pants off of him in a debate last week. I'm going to play one small piece of audio from that debate later, and I've played it before, but it needs to be played again because it absolutely symbolizes the profound weakness of Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell does not want a deal. And all of this talk about, well, Speaker Pelosi, why don't you make a deal? Why don't you make a deal? All the media, the corporate news media, the CNN and Wolf Blitzer, chief among them. Well, why don't you do a deal, Madam Speaker? Why don't you look at the American people in the eye and tell those people who don't have food, who don't have this, who don't have that, why you're not going to sign this deal? And it's just so fundamentally dishonest, and it mischaracterizes the Speaker's position and what's going on behind closed doors. A week ago today, that interview was had on CNN between Wolf Blitzer and Speaker Pelosi. And Wolf Blitzer just looked like a fool. And I think the Speaker did her job. And look, I'm not the biggest fan of Speaker Pelosi. I think she's done some good things, and she's done things that I don't think are very good. And I think that on this, though, she's doing the right thing. And I wish that someone from her camp would come on and have a conversation with me about Speaker Pelosi and her election campaign. I know that she hasn't really campaigned much. She's busy in D.C. and she's got lots of pressing matters. But she still has an election to run, a race to run. And, her opponent, Shahid Buttar, who I've spoken to here, who has been very kind to come on here, actually twice, The one time, of course, technology failed me, but the second time it did not. And, Mr. Bitar had a great opportunity, and he spent a lot of time outlining his agenda and his positions and the issues and about Speaker Pelosi as well. But I would really like to hear from either Christine Pelosi or someone at Team Pelosi. And respectfully, I really mean that. I would like to have someone from the Speaker's team come on for 15 to 20 minutes or however long. Shahid Buttar had almost an hour to talk. Surely somebody on the Speaker's side, and I don't expect the Speaker to come on for an hour. I don't expect the Speaker to come on at all. It would be great. I mean, I'm one of her constituents. But, it would be really great to have Christine Pelosi come on and talk, honestly talk about the issues and about the Speaker and her campaign and some of the challenges and what she sees. And these are the kinds of things I would like to have a conversation with Christine Pelosi about, or someone from Team Pelosi. But I want to say that Speaker Pelosi here is doing the right thing. And Mitch McConnell has no intent to have a deal. I mean, let's be honest. The New York Times yesterday, the New York Times, with a headline by Emily Cochrane and Nicholas Fandos. The title of the piece, the headline of the story is McConnell moves to head off stimulus deal as Pelosi reports progress. Now listen, I told you that in July, Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell particularly walked away from the talks. These talks have been going on since May. And this was the deal that Speaker Pelosi had even back then. She came down from where she was on the deal, and the Republicans really have not made that much of a movement to $1.8 trillion. At least not in my estimation. I mean, she's moved more than they have. I mean, I think they. I mean, maybe I don't have that number exactly correct, but she's made more concessions than I think they have. And now McConnell doesn't want to deal. He has told people in his Republican Senate membership that he has told the White House not to do a deal before the election with the Democrats. Here's the subtitle of the story. The top Republican in the Senate told colleagues that he had advised the White House against striking a pre-election deal with Democrats to deliver pandemic aid, fearing political repercussions. Isn't that funny? He doesn't fear political repercussions over ramming through a Supreme Court pick. No, he doesn't fear any political repercussions over that. But God forbid he should rush through and get a real package, a credible package, and get a deal done with Speaker Pelosi for pandemic aid relief for millions of Americans. In a pandemic like this one that's really killing so many hundreds of thousands of people. People starving, people on the streets, people evicted from their homes, people in disarray, they've lost their jobs, the economy stinks. God forbid. And he doesn't think that there's political repercussions from him not doing a deal. He doesn't think there's political repercussions of telling people in the White House not to do the deal with the Democrats before the election. That kind of tells you the world of Mitch McConnell is a very lonely and cruel place. If he is that confident that and it's been according to 4 different people in the Republican Senate who have confirmed this. 4 Republicans familiar, I don't know if they're in the Senate, but 4 Republicans familiar with his remarks. And they were confirmed by them. McConnell threw cold water on Mr. Trump's increasingly urgent push to enact a new round of pandemic aid before Election Day. They came just as Ms. Pelosi offered an upbeat assessment of her negotiations with Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, telling Democrats that their latest conversation had yielded, quote, common ground as we move closer to an agreement, end quote. The cost of their emerging compromise on a new round of aid to hard-pressed Americans and businesses had steadily climbed toward $2 trillion. Now, Speaker Pelosi, by the way, is at $2.2 trillion. Mitch McConnell put forth $500 billion. Are you kidding me? That's just nonsense from McConnell. Inching closer to Ms. Pelosi's demands, even as it far exceeds what most Senate Republicans have said they can accept. What do you mean? Most Senate Republicans have said what they can accept? Do the Republicans remember that they actually have constituents to answer to? Do the Republicans remember that they actually have constituents who aren't making $1 million a year or more? I mean, the arrogance, this is the way the story is being written, but this is not a good look for Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, nor is it even a good look for Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is just doing this to get votes. That's the cynical political play that he's making. But it ain't going to make a difference, because people are not voting depending upon whether Donald Trump does the deal. One person might be, at least one, the Pennsylvania voter that I got occasion to talk to over the weekend, who says, now this is what he says, that if Speaker Pelosi gets the deal done before Election Day, he'll vote for Joe Biden. If she doesn't get it done, according to this voter I spoke to by phone over the weekend, if she doesn't get it done before Election Day, he says he's voting for Donald Trump. That sounds like a guy who, I don't think that people should underestimate or overlook people like that phone caller, that voter. But I think people are fed up. They want a deal, but they don't want a deal that's going to be detrimental to the American public. At least I don't think so. But this whole idea that Speaker Pelosi is at fault, nothing could be further from the truth. She's making progress. Mnuchin and company are making progress. And now Mitch McConnell is telling the White House, don't do a deal. Telling Mnuchin and the White House, don't do the deal with Speaker Pelosi before the election? Really? Mitch McConnell doesn't give a damn about Americans. Mitch McConnell doesn't give a damn about Kentucky. And I think it's about time that the voters of Kentucky smell the coffee and vote for Amy McGrath.
There is only one America. No Democratic rivers. No Republican mountains. Just this great land and all that's possible on it, with a fresh start. Cures we can find. Futures we can shape. Work to reward. Dignity to protect. There is so much we can do if we choose to take on problems and not each other, and choose a president who brings out our best. Joe Biden doesn't need everyone in this country to always agree. Just to agree we all love this country, and go from there.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Robert Costa, last word goes to you. Please explain to the lay people in our audience, myself included, who don't speak Washington, why it is Mitch McConnell doesn't want to deal with a stimulus bill when people are hurting because it may interfere with the passage of Judge Barrett to the Supreme Court.
In brief, Brian, based on my reporting today, Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi, they cut the HEROES Act back earlier in the year in March as the pandemic unfolded. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was largely left on the sidelines. It's always been the White House and the Speaker cutting these deals. 2 weeks before this presidential election, 2 weeks before many of his senators put his majority on the line. I'm told that Leader McConnell doesn't want to be pulled into another deal that's not cut by him. He wants to set the terms. He sees the number inching toward $2 trillion, and he's ready to draw the line on that, even though many Republicans who are vulnerable in the House and in the Senate are saying to him privately, I'm told, they need that jolt. They need that stimulus to show something to their voters if they're in a tight race. But at this point, the majority leader feels like the speaker could be outplaying the White House, and he's not going to put his thumbprint on it and his thumb on the scale and say, I'm going to endorse that deal.
That was Robert Costa of the Washington Post talking about Mitch McConnell. I mean, just underlining what I have been saying here, and the New York Times story that came out yesterday. I mean, Mitch McConnell doesn't care about the average person. He does not care about the average American. He does not care about the average Kentuckian. And I think the voters in Kentucky, when they vote, if they've voted already, I know early voting has begun in Kentucky in person. I think that Kentucky voters have really got to see Mitch McConnell for what he is, a complete fraud, just like Donald Trump is. I mean, Mitch McConnell, Moscow Mitch, has done a lot of damage over these last 36 years. And I think that's 36 years too much. And I think they should really send him home to the bluegrass state so that he does not inflict any further damage on this country, because that's what he's done. Kentucky in the bottom 6 or 7 states in healthcare, in education, in jobs. I mean, it's just crazy. Employment, their unemployment level is high. I mean, this is just how is this guy continuing to get term after term after term? Is it? I mean, I don't want to cast any aspersions on the voters, but it just really makes me wonder what is going on. I mean, put it this way. One thing that did happen this year that was good was that Steve King of Iowa got voted out. I'm so glad that Steve King, that racist from Iowa who had been in power in Iowa in the House of Representatives for nearly 20 years or so, 20 years, about that long, is finally going to be out of a job in Congress. Thank God. He'll go back to being a lobbyist or something come January the 3rd or whatever, 2021. But I am so glad that Iowa voters in that district there got an idea and they finally got rid of him. And so now he's in his final, 3 months or so of time in the U.S. House. And I'm so glad that the voters did that. Hopefully the voters in Kentucky can do the same to Mitch McConnell. I would love that. We're only 13 days away. We're only 13 days away. And that's really what I want to get to now. So far, as of today, as I record this, some 42 million people, over 42 million people have voted here in the United States of America. And I had said this to you yesterday, that I think by the time we get to, say, November 2nd, we will have about 60 million people voting before we get to November 3rd. I think that that's going to happen clearly now with 13 full days of voting remaining. I mean, this is staggering. And by the way, this is according to the U.S. Elections Project. And they have a great website. And they're on Twitter as well, which I think should give out their handle. It is Elect Project is their Twitter handle. They've broken it down like this for these 42.1 million votes. Mail-in ballots, 30.2 million of those. In-person votes, 11.9 million. That's a really staggering number of people voting in person. That's almost 12 million people, 11.9 million in person. 30.2 million mail-in ballots. Now, what you're going to see from the Republicans, Donald Trump, they're going to be challenging mail-in ballots. This is a pandemic, so people are voting with mail-in ballots because they don't want to take a chance in person, although there's lots of people voting in person. But you can bet that the Trump campaign will spend all of the money it's got, because it doesn't have very much, but because they're devoting all their money to this effort. That's why you're seeing less ad money being spent, is because all the money that Trump has now is being thrown to lawyers, thrown to election lawyers, thrown to these lawsuits, because they're just throwing frivolous lawsuits at us, at you, the American public. Oh my goodness, the R on the end of his name isn't curved properly. Well, we've got to challenge that ballot. You've got to throw it out. I mean, that is what you're looking at here. I mean, this is how they're going to try to steal this election. This is how they're going to do it. But fortunately for Democrats, they have an army of lawyers of their own. And fortunately for Democrats, they have a load of people, a load of election lawyers who are taking this very seriously, who have been winning some very big victories in courts. Mark Elias's excellent democracy Docket.com website and his efforts, tireless efforts, winning lawsuits all over the country against Republican voter suppression, against all kinds of laws that these state legislatures are trying to do, or these voting things that are trying to be pushed. Greg Palast, I must not forget him. Greg Palast has done some excellent work. He's been on this podcast back in the summertime. His great and important book, How Trump Stole 2020, is available now. So please read that book. It makes for some grim reading, but it's very necessary reading. Maybe you can read it on one of those long lines that you're waiting on when you go out to vote. But it's a really good book, and I recommend it very highly. You can go back and search the episodes for Greg Palast, Palast. He appeared on this Politicrat podcast a few months ago. And you can also go, by the way, to his website at Greg, Palast as in Sam, T as in Tom.com. That's gregpalast.com to get all the latest information about what's going on with voter suppression, how we can counteract it, all of those things. And quite frankly, my quick answer to how we can counteract voter suppression is to vote, is to get out there and vote in droves. As I have said many times, if you vote early, if we vote early and do so in droves, in record numbers that we're seeing right now, we will win. It will be overwhelming. I think it will be a landslide. If this continues the way it has, long lines have still gone on all over the country for voters in person. Lots of mail-in ballots, as you heard me say just a few minutes ago. If we continue this kind of pace, we will defeat any voter suppression efforts, because there will be so many people voting that it will overwhelm and offset the Republican voter suppression efforts. Because don't forget, they are going on. You've got to bake this into that cake. And that's why you don't trust polls. No one's suppressing the pollster, right? When these pollsters give out their polls and they interview people, no one's suppressing them, right? No one's no one's doing any dirty tricks to them. Perhaps except some of the voters who may lie to them and say that, no, I'm voting for Joe Biden. So I want you to understand, people, that polls are not something to pay attention to, but pay attention to this. Please get out there and vote. Please make sure you tell everyone you know who hasn't yet voted to vote now and not wait. And also make sure, please, to remember this fact whenever you get a little bit nervous and you're not sure, you're anxious. And look, we're going to be anxious these next 13 days. But please understand this. If we vote early and in droves and vote like we've never voted before and vote like our lives depend on it, because they do, and we vote in these record-breaking numbers that we continue to see, we will prevail.
Hey, everybody. One of the most inspiring things about this year has been to see so many young Americans fired up, organizing, marching, and fighting for change. Your generation can be the one that creates a new normal in America. one that's fair, where the system treats everybody equally and gives everybody opportunity. We can come out of this moment stronger than before. Voting doesn't accomplish that on its own, but we can't accomplish that without voting. I know there's plenty out there to make people feel cynical, and plenty of people are going to seize on that to convince you that your vote doesn't matter. It's not new. It's one of the oldest voter suppression tactics there is. What is new is a growing movement for justice, equality, and progress on so many issues. This is really a tipping point, and that momentum only continues if we win this election. In times as polarized as these, your vote doesn't just matter. It matters more than ever before. And to change the game on any of the issues we care about, Joe Biden needs your vote. I know Joe better than almost anybody. I trust him to be a great president. He's different. He's on the right side of the issues. He'll get the job done. And Joe and Kamala will want you to keep pushing them to get the job done. Participate and vote. It's not always pretty. Trust me, I know. But it's how, bit by bit, we've made progress over the generations. And it's how your generation is going to change the game entirely. Go to iwillvote.com to make your plan. Then get some friends to join you. Let's go win this thing.
That was President Obama and making an appeal to voters, actually particularly to young voters. And he campaigned, by the way, today in Philadelphia. He made an important stop to speak to black men in particular, and I think other men of color as well, but particularly to black men, to encourage them, many of them younger black men, to vote. It's crucial that that happened because black men are important to the political process, and it's important that black men vote. And look, it's very clear in my view that an overwhelming majority of black men who do vote will be casting a vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I think that is very clear. What is not clear is how many people will cast a vote for Donald Trump, how many black men will do that, and how many of them are younger versus older, those kinds of things. So, I think that, and I'll get into that, I think, at some point, perhaps maybe tomorrow or Friday, but that's an important ingredient. Black women, we know, are very reliable in terms of voting for the Democratic Party. And these kinds of efforts aren't aimed at black women because black women know what time it is. I mean, that's a simple fact. But we've seen this in the media, at least, and with a percentage of black men. And we need to, first of all, understand why that's happening, why there is about 10 to 15% of black men who are either sitting on the fence or who are Trump supporters or who are going to vote for him. And we need to find out why, and then we need to start doing work about drilling down on that and then telling the black men who feel this way or who are thinking of voting this way why they should vote for Joe Biden and make that case to them and about the process of voting, period. Of course, I've talked here before about Cedric Humphrey, who is a Pennsylvania resident and a student. And remember last week at the Joe Biden town hall in Philadelphia that Cedric Humphrey was one of the people who asked a question of the vice president. And while I think Cedric looked a little agitated at Joe Biden in the way he posed his question, I think it was great to see that 24 hours later on Don Lemon's program, Cedric was very clear. He's voting for Joe Biden. And he had to think about it. And then he also got to speak to Joe Biden on Saturday, just this past Saturday. So, that's important. Now, I just hope and I expect that he will tell his friends to vote for Joe as well. But there's still work that the Biden campaign has to do to woo black male voters. I have talked about this on and off during the last couple of months. That Joe Biden's campaign has to do more to reach out to black men. Now, this is an issue. This is an issue. I think 85% plus of black men who vote will vote for Joe Biden. But we need to shore this up the same way that you see Joe Biden going after white working class voters, and particularly white working class men. That is the kind of fervor he has to have going after black male voters as well, going after black men. And I hope that his campaign does so. And I hope that he does so. I mean, ads in barbershops ain't going to cut it. You need to do outreach. You need to do serious outreach. And President Obama is a great example of that today. And he had a meeting today with young black men. And, you know, he definitely, with what you just heard there, is genuflecting in that direction. And certainly the meeting with the black men that he met with today is another step to that. And he's campaigned in Philadelphia as well today, in addition to that. And you're bringing in the heavy hitters like President Obama to close this thing down and to make sure that voters have a message. And it's important for us to keep pushing this message and also to be educated about Joe Biden's agenda. I've been critical of Joe Biden, yeah, of course, and we should still be. And also, I have praised him for some of the things he's doing in this agenda. His Black America agenda is very comprehensive. It could be even more so. But I am very encouraged by it. And to those who are out there on the progressive side, and I'm a progressive myself, but for those on the progressive side of things who are still, and it's a small few, it's not a lot of people, but it is a small group of people, a small percentage, shall I say, who are saying, well, you know, the system stinks and they're both part of it. Yeah, and I agree, they are. It is a system being controlled by both of these parties. But we have to have a long-term strategy as to how we deal with that. Not just be on the sideline complaining about how it is. Let's get involved. And I'm not saying that some people aren't getting involved, but that I'm sure there are some. But we've got to be active, get involved, and keep being involved. And voting for someone that you may not think is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but you may agree with on some things, is better than not voting at all. And it's certainly better than voting for Donald Trump. Joe Biden will listen to you, and he can be pushed. I've talked about this many times. Donald Trump cannot be pushed, and he won't listen to you. He doesn't even listen to his closest advisors. And voting third party ain't cutting it either. Because what will happen is that Joe Jorgensen or, you know, whatever that guy's name is, Howie Hawkins, these folks will go away and they will not be heard from until 2024. That is how it works with these parties. You hear very little, if anything, from them after you've given them your vote and they've obviously lost. And then, of course, just a few months before the election, hey presto, voila, there they are. Where you been the last 4 years, Howie? Where you been the last 4 years, Joe? Where you been the last 4 years, Jill? And I know I say Joe and Jill. I don't mean Joe and Jill Biden. I mean Joe Jorgensen and Jill Stein. For those of you who did vote for Jill Stein, and I know people personally who did, and I can tell you, the people I know who I spoke to before they voted for Jill Stein and after they voted for Jill Stein and this year, they are not voting for any third party. Let me tell you that, mate. They're not voting third party here. They are voting and have voted for Joe Biden. I am happy to report that that is the case. I am happy to report that at least one of the loyal listeners that I have to this podcast has got in touch with me and said that she has convinced her mother, who at first was saying things like, oh my goodness, Donald Trump's definitely the person come on, you've got to vote for him. Well, one of the loyal listeners to this very podcast here told me that she convinced her mother to go and vote for Joe Biden and that she voted for Joe Biden. I was very happy. And that listener knows who she is. And I want to say thank you for doing that. I don't really want to name the person, but I do say thank you very much, because that is what it's going to take. This is the era of persuasion. And it is the era of voting. And those two things are the key ingredients of Operation Landslide. If we are to have Operation Landslide work the way it is supposed to work, with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris winning by large margins to the point in which we're not sitting here late on November 3rd biting our fingernails to the nub, then you have to do what loyal listeners do, who talk to their own family members, their own parents, and turn them around, convince them, no, Trump is not who you need to be voting for. You have to vote for Joe Biden. And then lay out the issues like I'm sure this loyal listener did. And thank you for being so loyal. This is really important. This is the kind of conversation. These are the conversations that need to be had. These are the things that make the difference. The conversations you have with family members who may be on the fence or who may not be a big fan of Biden. This makes the difference, right? Somebody who, has a conversation with a family member and says, you've got to vote for Joe Biden. Here's why. Look at what's happening. Look what's happened under Trump these 4 years. Look what he's done. Look what he hasn't done. Look who he's hurt. Look who he hasn't hurt. Look who's benefited from his policies, and look who has been hurt by them. And that's the key. Persuasion. And I am so happy that there are people. And if this loyal listener to this podcast, if she was able to do that, then I can imagine for sure that there are others who are doing it too. And you must as well. Now, if it's feasible, if you can do that, do it, please. I would try. Now, if someone's just aggressively hostile and angry, and they're just angry at you and they're shouting at you and they're violently shouting and it's just really nasty and they're really agitated, people like that, I would just leave alone. I really would. Those are people who are just angry and they just will not change. And if they're violently angry like that, you know the types I'm talking about, then I would just move along. But if there are people out there that you know, whether they're friends, whether they're family members, your spouse, your child, which I doubt you'd have to convince, but you never know, please, you need to listen to them, hear them out. Very important to do those two things. Listen to them. And then tell them why voting, especially voting for Joe Biden is the right thing to do. I really want to hear that you have persuaded somebody. I've persuaded people and it's worked so far. I've persuaded people to vote early. I've persuaded people I know to make sure that they vote for Joe Biden. And I'm pleased at that. I'm hoping to persuade a few more people that I know and the people that I am aware of and know of that I can contact. So I can tell you that that's what I'm trying to do, and I expect that you are too. If you're not, then make sure you do, because there are people still, a small slither, that there are still people out there to be persuaded, believe it or not. You would think that this is a very clear choice, and it is, but you would think that there wouldn't be people out there, but there still are, believe it or not. And I think, it's around 5% or less now. People are very clear by and large what the story is here. And they've had a front row seat to this kind of show. And you know the S word to put in front of it, and it ain't super. People have made up their minds. And the fact that we have over 42 million people and counting who have already voted in this country, I think that tells you something that's very encouraging for Democrats. But we still have lots of work to do.
Everybody's fatigued, but let's look back at why we're fatigued, and are there any places in the world that aren't fatigued? We're fatigued because this pandemic continues. It continues because we have not done, as a nation, as a people, what we should do to control it. There are 1.4 billion people in the world today that have no COVID fatigue because they have no COVID. That's because their government did what they should do and followed the rule book about how to control a pandemic. There were 650 million people who traveled over the last several weeks in China for their Golden Week, and nobody got COVID. We have 60,000 cases. They have 11. We're 4 times lower, or 4.5 times lower in population. This virus can be controlled by public health measures. This is no time to stop it by public health measures. Now, I know when I say China, I get attacked on social media violently for being pro-totalitarian. I am not a totalitarian, but I am in favor of public health measures which are proven to control this epidemic. We can do it. We're just not doing it, nor is the Western world doing it. It's a real tragedy that never needed to happen, and it's time for our political leaders, both at the state and national level, to begin to take those measures, which we can do now, to keep people at home in comfortable positions in an American way to stop this epidemic before we have vaccines, which we don't know whether they'll work, or drugs, which at best work a very little bit.
Welcome back. And we've got this pandemic. Oh, God. You know, you just heard there from William Hazeltine. And look, he's a doctor. He's an author. He's someone who's done a lot of very good work. And he put it right out there on Front Street. And I think it's not a surprise. I think you know very well that the United States of America has been an abject failure in terms of, under Donald Trump, of course, in terms of responding to this pandemic and doing the kinds of things that would have made people in this country a lot safer, would have reduced the death in this country from coronavirus by many, many hundreds of thousands, many thousands, and certainly by more than 100,000. We've probably, had we taken the measures of lockdowns, very serious ones like the ones in Italy and in New Zealand, we would probably have less than 5,000 people passing from this virus. And look, any loss of life is a loss of life too many. And I'm not trying to trivialize anything here, but had Donald Trump and the Republicans, and quite frankly, a lot of these states, been more aggressive about shutting things down and closing things down like they had to be closed, had that happened, we would be in whole lot more better shape. We really would be. And it just angers you to know that we just, Donald Trump just allowed this to happen. And I told you, he's a genocider. That is not popular language with some, but I don't care. Because there are 222,000 people and counting who are no longer with us. They're dead. Donald Trump has blood in his hands, and there are families all over this country who do not have their loved one with them because they died from this virus. While Donald Trump was telling Bob Woodward, "Oh yeah, Bob, it's deadly." While he was saying all of that, he was telling you and I and people all across this country this.
The coronavirus.
This is their new hoax.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China.
One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
When you have 15 people, and within a couple of days it's going to be down to close to zero, we really think we've done a great job in keeping it down to a minimum.
I like this stuff. I really get it. People are surprised that I understand it.
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
This guy doesn't take responsibility at all. He never learns. He never will. And even when he had the virus, and he still does have it, quite frankly, saying that it's a blessing that he got it is an insult to every single one of those 222,000 people who have died in this country from the virus, and to anyone abroad. You know, almost a million point whatever, 3 million, 4 have died from this virus worldwide. And I think it's a whole lot higher than that. The notion that a highly contagious, extremely contagious virus has only, listen to me, only resulted in a million or so deaths is quite, I don't want to say the word laughable, but it's ridiculous. I'm telling you, there's so many more people who have passed away from this virus, and we're not going to find that out until, way down the line, sadly. And I think people out there in the know who are in the right places probably already know the numbers and what they are, and that they are far higher than this. So, this is what's going on. And it just really is infuriating that this has happened. And it is a genocide. It's completely a genocide. And it's about time that people say it and open their mouths and say it out loud. Tweet it, Facebook it, Instagram it, whatever, video it, whatever. Just acknowledge that, please, because you don't, if you're not, you do a disservice to those 222,000 people if you don't say the words. Everyone's tiptoeing around it, except, Senator Harris came the closest. He has a reckless disregard for human life. That's a manslaughter charge. That's murder. That's what she's saying. She was a district attorney here in San Francisco. She knows. She was Attorney General of California. She knows. But that's what's going on. It's mass murder on genocidal scales. I mean, this is evil. And for us not to look at that and say it and call it out like it is, and for this election to even be close, because again, Joe Biden's campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dillon, made it very clear last week on Twitter that she has information suggesting that this election is a lot closer than people on Twitter and some of the pundits on television and cable TV are saying. And it wouldn't surprise me. These elections always get tight, or they always get a little closer. The polls do as well, which I've always said you should ignore. We are now 13 voting days away from the end of this election season. And it's going to be very intense, very nerve-wracking. And this pandemic is here still. It's not going anywhere. It's getting worse. I don't believe in second and third waves. I believe in this freaking pandemic is still blooming well here. That's the wave I believe in. It's still here. I don't care. First, second, third, eighth wave. The darn thing is here and it hasn't left. So we've got to do all the things that we must do to safeguard ourselves. This is a very tense time in this country, in the United States. So we've got to wear a mask. We've got to wear gloves. We've got to wash our hands, and we've got to be physically distant. You have to do all of those things. You can't just do one. Do all of those very simple, easy things. And believe me, you will be protecting yourself and others. And please avoid large crowds and avoid Trump rallies. Believe me, it will work wonders for you. This pandemic, we must do everything we can in our own power to reduce the spread of this deadly virus. And yes, people are fatigued by the virus, fatigued by the pandemic. I hope that you are fed up of people dying more than anything. And I hope that you and anybody else you know take every step you can to reduce the spread of this virus, and also show everybody that you care enough to wear a mask and be physically distanced from people and not go into these public spaces where there are tons of people, or go indoors where there are tons of people. This virus is laying waste to people, and we now must have education and the simple steps it takes to safeguard ourselves and each other. Welcome back. 13 days of voting. Please, if you have not voted, I'll say it one more time. If you have not yet voted, vote today. Vote right now. Please vote early. Vote now. Very important. Preferably in person. It's very important. If you are willing to stand on a long line, then do so. You're doing this for yourself, for your future, for your family's future, for your kids' future, and you're doing it for the country. This is your patriotic and civic duty. So now's the time to do this. Wear a mask, physically distance, get out there, get some snacks, get a book. You know, it's really sad that we do have to wait in many places, particularly in black and brown districts in this country and native districts, that we're waiting on these obscenely long lines because of Republican voter suppression and gerrymandering, which has done this. We need to get election protection bills through, and we can only do that when we get a majority Democratic Senate. And once that happens, I think a lot of this garbage that you're seeing, and we can turn these state legislatures blue, a lot of this garbage you're seeing will be much, much lessened, believe me. And we need to overturn the horrible Shelby County versus Holder U.S. Supreme Court decision. It's an onerous and ugly decision and really, really atrocious. So please vote. If you haven't already, tell your friends to do the same. And, this is it now. It's going to get very intense. I know people have had enough of all of this. They're probably, some of you listening may be fed up of me telling you to vote if you haven't voted and all of that. But this is important, 13 more voting days. And for these next few days, the focus is going to be voting and making sure that you tell people to do that, because we are down to the wire here. Never underestimate Donald Trump and these Republicans who have their dirty tricks and their criminal activity. And I say that with not idly, by the way. So please get out there and vote. Make sure you educate people, persuade people. This is persuasion time. Get into phone banking for Joe Biden's campaign and for any Senate campaign for Democrats who need the help. Jamie Harrison needs the help in South Carolina. Mike Espy in Mississippi, may I not forget him. He needs the help in Mississippi. Doug Jones in Alabama, he needs the help. You need a phone bank for these folks. Get in touch with their campaigns. Teresa Greenfield in Iowa, Mark Kelly in Arizona, Sarah Gideon up in Maine, Cal Cunningham in North Carolina. You've got John Hickenlooper in Colorado, Steve Bullock in Montana. These are just a few of the Senate races that are in contention, up for grabs. And let me not forget, of course, Amy McGrath, who I mentioned earlier, against, of course, Moscow Mitch there in Kentucky. And, of course, MJ Hagar against John Cornyn in Texas. We've got to help MJ and her campaign. Please get in touch with these campaigns in these last days, because it makes the difference. Phone banking, text banking, getting involved, getting on YouTube or Twitter or any of these other platforms, and emphasize to your followers the importance of voting right now, and phone banking, volunteering in any way you can over these final 13 days of voting. Be a poll worker. If you're younger, if you're under the age of 40, I strongly recommend, and you don't want to sit there on November 3rd and bite your nails, then get out there and be a poll worker. You get paid for this. I've done this before. I was a precinct captain 4 years ago. Because I'm so superstitious, I'm not doing that this year. But I can tell you that you learn a lot. You get leadership skills, all kinds of very good things that being a poll worker does. It's a very good thing. You have civic engagement. You get educated. So please also do that. You can apply for that. I've got a whole list of things about that on my voting guide you can find on my Twitter page at the Popcorn REEL. And don't forget, folks, don't forget, the t-shirts are still available. The Politicrat online store. Please do yourself a favor and visit that store at www.the-politicrat.myshopify.com. Thank you very much indeed for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.
You've got two ways to vote right now. Number one, you can vote early in person through next Tuesday. How many people, anybody here voted early already? Just, if you haven't, just go to iwillvote.com/PA and find out where you can vote early. Number two, you can vote from home with a mail-in ballot. Just go to iwillvote.com/PA to request your ballot right away. And before you send it back, Pennsylvania's got this thing where you've got to use both envelopes. So you've got to read the directions carefully to make sure your vote counts. And if you've already voted, then you've got to help your friends and family make a plan to vote. Take them with you if you vote early or if you vote in person on election day, because this election requires every single one of us to do our part. And what we do these next 13 days will matter for decades to come. Now, last time I was in Philadelphia, I was at the Constitution Center. And I was delivering a speech for the Democratic National Convention this year. And I said during that speech, I've sat in the Oval Office with both of the men who are running for president. And they are very different people. I explained that I never thought Donald Trump would embrace my vision or continue my policies, but I did hope, for the sake of the country, that he might show some interest in taking the job seriously. But it hasn't happened. He hasn't shown any interest in doing the work or helping anybody but himself and his friends or treating the presidency like a reality show that he can use to get attention. And by the way, even then his TV ratings are down. So you know that upsets him. But the thing is, this is not a reality show, this is reality. And the rest of us have had to live with the consequences of him proving himself incapable of taking the job seriously. At least 220,000 Americans have died. More than 100,000 small businesses have closed. Millions of jobs are gone. Our proud reputation around the world is in tatters. Presidents up for re-election usually ask if the country is better off than it was 4 years ago. Well, I'll tell you one thing. 4 years ago, you'd be tailgating here at the Link instead of watching a speech from your cars. The only people truly better off than they were 4 years ago are the billionaires who got his tax cuts. Right now, as we speak, Trump won't even extend relief to the millions of families who are having trouble paying the rent or putting food on the table because of this pandemic. But he's been doing all right by himself. As it turns out, this was just reported in the last 48 hours. We know that he continues to do business with China because he's got a secret Chinese bank account. How is that possible? How is that possible? A secret Chinese bank account. Listen, can you imagine if I had a secret Chinese bank account when I was running for re-election? You think Fox News might have been a little concerned about that? They would have called me Beijing Barry. It is not a great idea to have a president who owes a bunch of money to people overseas. That's not a good idea. I mean, of the taxes Donald Trump pays, he may be sending more to foreign governments than he pays in the United States. His first year in the White House, he only paid $750 in federal income tax. Listen, my first job was at a Baskin Robbins when I was 15 years old. I think I might have paid more taxes that year working at a dispensing ice cream. How is that possible? How many people here paid less than that? It's possible, just possible now, that if you are living high on the hog and you only pay $750 in taxes, that maybe, just maybe, he might not know what working people are going through here in Pennsylvania. We cannot afford 4 more years of this, Philadelphia. But the good news is, right now you can choose change. Right now you can vote for my friend Joe Biden and his running mate Kamala Harris as the next president and vice president of the United States of America.